Do you have friends at work? More specifically, the kind that practically feels like family? The type of people you can trust with real life issues, not just quote-unquote work talk? Well, if you nodded yes to yourself at any point during those questions, then you might just have a relationship similar to that of Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich.
So I figured I better come out here and do this and somehow say goodbye to him, which is an impossibility.
Because let's face it, there is no relationship in the NBA between a coach and a player that came anywhere close to what they had. There is arguably no other leader who has said goodbye to one of his players in such an emotional way. A goodbye so endearing, in fact, that a tear or two just might have been shed. Known by all as one of the top elite teams in the league, the San Antonio Spurs strategist revealed a sensitivity that only rarely comes to the forefront. But as we all know, sometimes goodbyes can be tough, even if they aren't necessarily permanent ones. If you want to learn more about Duncan's success as both a coach and a friend, then make sure to stay tuned for the rest of today's video. Although Tim Duncan was a valuable asset to his team, a hard worker, and clearly a devoted and trustworthy friend, it didn't necessarily mean that everything in his life was peaches and roses. In fact, during this time, he was actually having some issues in his home life. With a wife who had declared they were on the verge of separation after leaving home and moving to another country with their son, it was apparent that Duncan was going through a rough patch.
Break the law, you do a crime, you have to do what you have to pay up.
The situation didn't go by unnoticed by Greg Popovich, who was always attentive to the way his players were dealing with life in general, because he knew what was happening off the court was just as important as what was happening on it. So he asked for the woman's phone number and called her. "Excuse me, I don't want to interfere in your lives, but we take care of every family here, and I don't think leaving like this is the best way. Your place is next to your husband, who is earning the family's money. You have to go back and talk to him. He's suffering. I think he deserves it." The woman was surprised, beyond a certain amount of anger, to receive such a request from her husband's coach. But, of course, at the same time, she knew that Popovich was more than just the coach, that his advice was coming from a place of kindness and compassion for his friend, and she returned. With her husband, there was an agreement, at least temporary, and the player returned to his best. We know that Popovich was a coach really unlike any other, but this was not to say that Tim Duncan isn't capable of ultimately being on the same level one day. However, considering the fact that Greg Popovich was working as the coach for the Spurs for over 40 years, it might take Duncan a little while to reach the same status. Since arriving in 1988 to work as Larry Brown's assistant, Greg has fulfilled almost every possible role: assistant, manager, coach, father, friend, teacher, and confidant. The boss, actually. A trainer transformed into a boss. A leader with two faces, capable of being as tough and demanding as an army sergeant, yet, when needed, warm, close, and thoughtful with his players. An eclectic character with an impressive wealth of nuances, with unparalleled principles and values that has allowed him to build one of the greatest dynasties in the history of American sport. With 5 titles in 15 years, 22 consecutive seasons qualifying for the playoffs, and one of the 3 most successful sports organizations in the world in the last 25 years, it's safe to say he's something of a legend. And when they connected with Duncan, it was clear that they were both made for each other. There was a unique connection that fed 2 personalities based on titles, victories, defeats, and difficult moments. That's what we noticed, but there was also sarcasm, joking, family moments, understanding, and a promise that came true on its own. That's what Popovich himself said. His father looked me in the eye before he died and told me that he held me responsible for continuing to be the same person he was at that moment. And that's right, he's grown up like we all do with experiences, but he's still the same despite the successes. That was one of the 2 moments when the 5-time champion with the Spurs had to slow down his speech so that he wouldn't let his emotions get the best of him. Saying goodbye to him is an impossibility for many reasons. Everyone also wonders who he would have had dinner with one night, and they would answer that it would be Mother Teresa, Jesus, the Dalai Lama. I honestly say my dinner would be with Timmy, or as we know him, Tim Duncan. He is the most real and consistent person I have ever met in my life. He is so genuine that it amazes you. Spending time with Timmy is sublime in many ways. People don't know about his intelligence, his sarcasm. He could be talking about why he doesn't grab rebounds and to berate him in front of everyone. And then I would find him and he'd say to me, "Thanks for the motivation, Pop. Thanks for your support." For a franchise to count a player for life throughout his career is a rarity only surpassed by Kobe Bryant in the Los Angeles Lakers, 20 years, or matched by John Stockton in Utah Jazz, and presumably Dirk Nowitzki in Dallas Mavericks, both with 19 campaigns. Even more bizarre is the fact that a coach stays as long as Pop has at San Antonio Spurs. So far, only Jerry Sloan in Utah has spent more seasons in the same outfit as Stockton. Kobe was coached by 11 coaches, and Phil Jackson is the one who left the deepest mark on him after being together 11 seasons in 2 different stages. Time can contribute to an enhancement of affection, but the key to such an intense coach-pupil relationship is the intelligence they both shared. It all started at the recruiting meeting held in the Virgin Islands, where Popovich went knowing that Duncan was a special guy. He went to his field because he knew his speech would be more effective there. The best player in the draft was persuaded by the team that had the first choice, and from there to write one of the chapters that the league leaders should be most proud of. The sincerity with which Popovich spoke about Durant in his farewell was the usual. But what was surprising was the modesty that appeared in some parts of the message that only the people closest to the coach knew. Those who know me know I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Tim. I'd be in the Budweiser League, fat, and trying to play or coach basketball. He's the reason I'm here. He's raised hundreds of us over the years. He never said a word. He'd come to work early and leave late. He's irreplaceable. He's been so important to so many people. To think that he's going away makes it very hard to imagine practices, games, the bus, grabbing a piece of carrot cake, or anything without him. The sporting world will miss Duncan, but there is an unsurpassed level of access to the league's most interesting personality. Pop experienced it, his kids experienced it, and all, to some extent, the players who were touched by his presence. It made many of them better, who then left, and their productivity suffered. Duncan extended his championship to the families of the members of the group who always respected him, because the opinion of the power forward was always the most required and his words the most heard. These reasons make us understand the compatibility of both. He led by example. He did not judge. What everyone expected was what they saw from him. How he faced the defeat in the finals against Miami and how he did with the victory in the finals against Miami. Popovich will never forget an image that we all saw. The coldness and formality turned into tears in both situations. The coach also knows about tears of joy. One of the best things that happened to the San Antonio Spurs in their history was losing 62 games in the 1996 to 1997 season and finishing with the 3rd worst record in the entire NBA. That turbulent start to the season left then general manager Greg Popovich in charge of settling as the new coach. And the low winning percentage became the power to choose first in the NBA draft, something that would become a player named Tim Duncan. But where there was fire, ashes remain, so the saying goes. So that relationship that seemed to end only went to another stage. Today, Duncan is Popovich's new assistant starting the 2019 to 2020 season, and almost poetic news for one of the most beloved relationships in the history of the NBA. Tim Duncan, a legend as a player, made his debut and won his first game as a coach in the NBA. The Spurs, led by their head coach Greg Popovich for personal reasons, won in Charlotte 103-104. The legendary Spurs center, who retired in May 2016 after 19 seasons in which he won 5 NBA titles, was 3 times MVP of the finals and 15 times All-Star, serves as Popovich's assistant coach. Being in that position is like night and day, but in fact I wasn't there because I counted on the work of all the assistants: Becky Hammon, Will Hardy, and Mitch Johnson. Mitch set up the game, Becky and Will designed the plays, and I just stood there yelling at people. We trained as a committee. Anyone could have been standing there and as a result would have been the same, Duncan said. And finally, Tim Duncan closes the door to this chapter. The possibility had been considered that Popovich's replacement, in the event of his absence from the bench, would be Becky Hammon, who had already been in charge in a summer league. Hammon is the leading candidate to one day become the first female head coach of an NBA team. The 43-year-old former player joked about his team's struggles to close out the win. He was dominating by 5 points with just seconds left, but the Hornets came close to coming back. They had to make it interesting. I think they did it out of spite, ironized Duncan, who had already coached the Spurs for a few minutes in the game against Portland in which Popovich was ejected. Make sure to subscribe down below and leave us a like. Check out some of these videos that appear on your screen.